All right. It's a couple minutes after, so we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for taking your time out for your busy days to join us. My name is Amy Lindgren. I'm the Solutions Manager here at Marco Technologies. We've been a partner with PrinterLogic since for the last, I believe, 2019. And today we're gonna discuss PrinterLogic and healthcare. As you guys know, IT guys and gals, the healthcare industry is like no other, right? So today we're here to discuss how PrinterLogic can assist the IT side solving healthcare printing issues. We'll discuss key benefits such as central management, automatic deployments, and how PrinterLogic can streamline printing process for your EMR, EHR, and office printing. If you have any questions during the presentation, please host them in the chat, and we'll get those answered for you right away. Maybe even do a little QA at the end. But thank you again for your time this morning. As I know you guys all have tons of projects and really busy, so we'll get started. I'm going to pass this over to Matt, and he will lead us through today's presentation.
Perfect. Thank you, Amy, and welcome everyone. Again, appreciate you taking the time to hang with us for the next hour. We do have a Q&A session inside of the Zoom. So if you have any questions, drop those in there. We'll get those answered or elevate those live, and then we'll open up your mics towards the end and can have any type of dialogue or answer questions that way. But give me a second here. I'm going to share my screen and then we'll go ahead and get going. So we're going to do a couple of different things here in the next 45, 50 minutes in terms of content for you guys. I'm going to bounce back and forth between some slides and try not to bore you too much with that and get into more of a demo of PrinterLogic and show you how this truly provides value to our healthcare customers. But just to kind of, by way of brief introduction here for who you have from the PrinterLogic side, myself, Matt Majewski, and Aaron Pena, we are the healthcare account executives at Vasion that focus on our PrinterLogic product. So any healthcare organizations across the US, we are the ones that spearhead those, and we work with you every step of the way to talk about the solution, talk through your requirements, and facilitate any testing and proof of concepts in there to make sure that what we are saying is actually working in your environment, and you can validate that from a technical perspective. And then we work with you to help create business justifications and move this project forward to get you tools that are going to create more efficiency inside of your world and provide an added benefit to your clinicians and the IT admin and regular staff. So we're happy to meet you today and excited to talk to this conversation. So when we talk to healthcare organizations, really I can boil it down to three different things or main goals, challenges, or that our healthcare customers are struggling with. The first is standardization and efficiency, and this is all going to focus on from a print perspective, but does translate to just broader IT initiatives. When you look at this in terms of printing, standardization, there are a number of different operating systems that clinicians are using and staff are using inside of hospitals and healthcare practices. They're not just pure Windows environments. There's Chrome OS, there's Mac, there's Linux thin client devices, there's mobile print use cases, there's virtualization, there's desktop as a service. And there is an inefficiency to be able to have one single solution to create a standard print architecture that can affect all these different things. So what we find is that as organizations grow, as they acquire new entities, and those entities have different requirements or different end user environments or printers in their fleet, there's an inability to really provide one single standard. So customers, what they've done over time is find point solutions that satisfy those individual requirements. Something like using Google Admin Console to do printing on Chrome OS, using specific solutions to administer printing on mobile devices. And as you do that, as you create more and more tools, you get more and more inefficiency in the process. It bogs down your IT team, and it just creates a lot of added work when printing should just work. It should be simple, and it's something that is needed and necessary in the healthcare vertical in particular. The second thing that we talked through is trying to reduce costs in really any way, shape, or form on the operating side, on the capital side. I've talked to a number of healthcare customers this year with some of the changes in laws about how you all are getting paid back from federal programs that were being unwind down from the COVID times. there's just a tightening of operating budget and looking more and adding more scrutiny to different costs that are out there and trying to figure out how we could do more with less, how we can reduce our operating expenses, and really provide more efficiency by doing that. And the last thing that we talked through, and that's first and foremost with any type of decision that is made in healthcare, is security around PHI. How are we handling PHI in the printed world? How is that having an impact in when we have a print server environment, and what we saw previously with Print Nightmare, a year to 18 months ago? How does that impact the security of PHI, and how does that translate to day-to-day operations and maintaining HIPAA compliance? So all of these things are at the forefront of all of our healthcare customers' minds when we're introducing PrinterLogic to them and talking about how this can provide a value. And now getting into more around how we are going to address these things. I'll go through some different problems that come up inside of healthcare, and then I'll kind of go through a demo and showing you how we put these things into practice and how this will simplify in comparison to what you are currently running in your environment. So in our world, print servers are really the cause of most of these problems. And when we look at managing a complicated print architecture inside of healthcare, and healthcare organizations, depending on which one you work for, you may have print servers supporting larger locations. You may have unmanaged direct IP supporting smaller clinics and in outpatient facilities, or you may have unmanaged direct IP everywhere. The whole problem is that print servers create complication. Unmanaged direct IP creates complicated processes as well. And there's not really, you need to find an easy way to provide that standardized architecture. So our mantra is to eliminate print servers and get down to one single centralized management console where you can effectively manage all of your printing and keep printing local via direct IP printing. So centralized management, direct IP printing kind of gives you the best of both worlds, eliminates print servers from the equation, and provides you that centralized mechanism. So all locations you have, whether you have one hospital and a couple of outpatient facilities, or many hospitals and hundreds of outpatient facilities, you can manage all print queues in our system through one centralized UI and maintain security of your print stream as well. In addition to that, what we find is that customers in the healthcare vertical, you're running pretty much two stacks of print architecture. You have client-side printing and print servers to support your traditional Windows printing and anything end user related. And then there's the back-end clinical side printing integrating with your EMR systems, Epic, Cerner, Meditech, whatever it is that you're running. And there's really a duplication of efforts in doing that. So you're effectively managing the same print queue in two different places and presenting it to two different systems. So what we can help you do is to bridge that gap and provide a single solution that allows you to manage the client-side printing as well as the back-end printing through one single unified console to affect all of your print architecture. And the last point here that I'll make is around printer deployment. With print servers or with direct IP environments today, what we find is that customers will use a variety of GPOs, scripts, or manual installation. And if you've ever created any GPOs or scripts or had to manually install printers to new devices going out into the field, it is a very arduous process. It's prone to error, and it just gets more and more complicated over time as you start to grow and expand different use cases. So what we'll show you is a simplified method for printer deployment, tools you have administratively to be able to have control of that, and tools that you can provide to your end users so that they can go and empower them to find their own printers and easily install them on their machines. So one more quick thing before we jump in. I wanted to go through just a quick architecture here and show you how the solution's laid out if you're not familiar with it at this point. So we are a SaaS first solution provider. So our PrinterLogic applications hosted in AWS and provided to you all as a service as customers to consume. The solution is very simple in terms of how things are laid out. All of the management happens in here in this PrinterLogic SaaS cloud, and we'll show you that in just a minute when we get into the demo. And this is where you'll manage all the individual print queues and create your policies for how you're going to deploy those printers to your end user machines. The second part here is what we do on the end user side. And we push a PrinterLogic client to the end user. And it's important to note that this client supports a wide variety of operating systems and device types. So like I mentioned before, where customers are buying point products to satisfy things like mobile printing or printing from Chrome OS, we can support pretty much anything that's in a healthcare environment today through PrinterLogic. So inclusive of Windows, Mac, Linux, Chrome OS, Android, iOS. If you're Citrix or VMware for virtualization, if you're using Azure Virtual Desktop, all these use cases are able to be satisfied through one single solution through the same end user experience utilizing the PrinterLogic client on that endpoint or within that endpoint operating system. So how the system works, once you get those two components spun up, it's very simple. The client, the PrinterLogic client that's on the end user device, communicates with the PrinterLogic SaaS management console. And it's going to receive all that information based on who the device or who's behind the device, what the device is, or where the device is, that being the client device. So that will kick off kind of the printer installation or deployment process, if you will. From there, on the device itself or on the end user operating system, all printers are created as local network printers or local TCP/IP printers. So all we're doing here is creating a centralized mechanism to manage direct IP printing. And the nice thing about this solution from a security perspective is that all printing is kept local on your network. So the print stream only goes from the PrinterLogic client direct to the target printer. We don't see any of the print stream data up in our cloud service, and there's no intermediary being a print server that sits in the way of that. So from an efficiency perspective, we're creating a more highly available architecture by introducing direct IP printing ubiquitously and making the transmission of that print job data more secure by keeping it local on your network, not funneling through a print server, not that is susceptible to breach, and not going and leaving your network into a cloud application. So let me jump over and show you a little bit of a tour of our management interface. So when you get in here on the management console, and when you have your own and you're doing testing in here, you would have your own URL set up. So whatever your domain is going to be, we'll customize that to your particular organization. In our system, how this is arranged is we have our folder structure or tree structure here on the left. This is how you logically organize printers. So most organizations will go locations. Say you have 5 different hospitals, you'll have a folder for each hospital. And then in there, you can have nested folders and get as granular to your heart's content as to how you want to logically organize your printers in here. This is all user defined. So however it makes sense to you, however you want to set up your deployment policies, this is going to align with that. The next thing we have to do in here is get printers into the system. This is where it's very simple to go from your current paradigm into PrinterLogic, both in a proof of concept and in a production installation. So we have a handy tool inside of here that allows us to attach to your print server, identify the print queues that you want to copy over into our system, and then start that copying process. So all you would need to do is just specify your host name of the print server in here, excuse me. Once you do that, all the print queues on that print server are then going to be populated in this list. And then you'll just go through, for testing purposes, you may select a couple. When you're doing a full deployment, we'll bring everything over and start the copying process into our system. But we'll select the printers here on the left, select the folder where we want it to go here on the right, and then you hit this little green arrow and that starts the copying process. It's important to note that when doing that, we're not changing anything fundamentally in terms of your print architecture. We're not reconfiguring the print queues. We're not deleting print queues off your print server. We're not changing how end users are printing. All we're simply doing is copying information into our system and then getting ready for you to make that conversion from server-based printing or unmanaged direct IP into a centrally managed direct IP environment. So when we do that copying, what ends up happening is we'll start to populate these printer objects here in this tree structure. So we'll bring over the printer name, location, comments, if those are defined. However the IP or however the port is defined, either by IP or host name, we'll bring that over and create the new printer object. And then most importantly, the driver information associated with it. So the driver that's attached to the print queue, and then any profiles that were attached to that driver as configured on the print server. So all that information is preserved that you already have in place and then just brought into our system. So at this point, nothing has changed in terms of how end users are printing. The way that we do that is installation of the PrinterLogic client on the end user device. So in order to do that, as I mentioned before, there's a couple of different things. And from an administrative perspective, we make it very easy to deploy this in mass. So you see here, we provide all the deployable packages. So MSI for Windows, PKG for Mac, and some flavors of Red Hat and Ubuntu. So you're able to package this up, push it out, and pre-position it without end users even knowing. It will auto-install in the background silently. So in most scenarios, when we're doing a conversion from print servers into PrinterLogic, your end customers, your users don't even know that anything's happening. They're still in the same application going file print. And all that's changing is now that print stream isn't going to a print server, it's going direct IP straight to the target printer. What you're going to gain as admins is now full control and ease of use of how to configure, build, and deploy these print queues. So I already showed how in here, we have all the driver information, we have the port information. So let's say, this one in particular needs a new driver. All I have to do really is go onto here for the operating system of my choice, select my new driver, click save. And as simple as that, this change now gets propagated out to your end users the next time the client checks in with the service. So this is more of a one-by-one basis. If I'm just changing a print driver on a specific printer and want to propagate that change out to my end users that have this print queue installed. If I want to do that in a bulk type of setting where, let's say there's a new version of this HP Universal that I want to deploy out for functionality purposes or maybe even security purposes, I need to change this driver in every single printer that's using it. So all I would do is highlight that here in the driver repository. I would click replace. I would say replace with a new driver. The system's going to tell me these are all the printers that are using that driver. Are you sure you want to make this change? I click OK. And then I would just go into here, browse in my INF file, and then upload it into the system. So in a couple of clicks, what ends up happening is anybody that was using that printer before, anybody had that printer deployed on their machine, and any print object that is using that driver is now changed and pushed out to the end user environment. So in a couple of clicks, you can affect changes for thousands of printers and tens of thousands of end users without having to redeploy GPOs, without having to set up new scripts inside of your virtual environments. Makes it very easy for any kinds of moves, adds, and changes of existing print queues in the system. On the deployment side, let's talk about that for a little bit here. So I mentioned before, a lot of customers use group policy, they use scripting or manual installation. So in order to eliminate those things, because again, they're complicated, they're error prone, and when we're talking about virtual settings or even just Windows environments, it takes time to map printers at startup and login that delays that session from opening, which then delays your clinician from being in front of their patient. So we simplify that by adding pretty much the same type of policies, but instantiating them in a different way. So we add these policies in here and you have all these different rule constructs for how you want to deploy printers. So I can target printer deployment based on Active Directory using my existing AD infrastructure, user computer group, container OU. This works by our PrinterLogic client running as a system service and being able to glean AD information on this local machine that is domain joined. So without a bind into Active Directory or direct connection, you can still use Active Directory for deployment policies and use the same AD infrastructure and syntax that or schema that you have for those deployment policies. We have a lot of customers that are moving to Azure AD. If you're an AD shop or other identity providers like Okta, like Google Identity, Imprivata, and the like, we can use users and group constructs in those environments, anything that's SAML 2.0 based, to also target printer deployments. So I have one customer that they had 5,200 printers, and I think it was 35,000 workstations. They were making a transition from on-prem AD to Azure AD, and going to have their devices joined, all domain joined in Azure AD. And they needed a solution to bridge the gap in that transition. So they went out and did a massive RFP to about 17 different providers. PrinterLogic ended up being the one that they selected. And now we've helped them move from their on-prem on-prem AD environment over to Azure AD, because we could sit in both places at the time of that transition and then slowly turn off the AD reliance and rely more on Azure AD. So we see a lot of customers going that way, and we have anything that's SAML 2.0 based we can hook into for these purposes. You can deploy by IP address range. This is really popular for any healthcare environment that has a large number of locations, outpatient clinics and the like, where there's a small number of printers per location. You have clinicians that go from location to location on a daily basis. So what IP address range objects do is we define these based on the user subnet. So if your user subnet in a given location is 192.168.1.1 to 255, we would define that here. We can attach these IP address range objects to a specific folder, which in the context of this this type of solution would be a location or an outpatient clinic. And then in here, we can say, I want to auto deploy all of the printers in this folder based on this IP range. So what ends up happening is anytime a clinician, a nurse, doctor goes into a specific facility and is in that range, they're going to get the printers in that location. Let's say they then close up their machine, they're in a new location the next day that has a different IP range. And we've set that up for auto deployment as well. What will happen is the previous printers will get removed from the machine. The new printers will get installed on the machine, and they will always have the printers available automatically in the location that they're in based on where they are that given day. So a very simple way to auto deploy based on location. And I have a number of customers that are doing this, that are large healthcare organizations that run 12 hospitals and have hundreds of outpatient clinics. They use this IP address range object to auto deploy all printers in that type of environment and make it simple for their end users. And from what I found, it eliminates the manual process that was in place before, which was, I'm a nurse, I'm going into a new location for the day, I don't have the printer I need, I'm picking up the phone or I'm generating a help desk ticket and I'm waiting for someone to map that printer manually for me. This gets around all of that because they're auto deployed. But if they're not, one other nice thing here too, I mentioned empowering your end users to self-install their own printers. The other thing that they can do in that specific setting or in that specific use case is use this self-service portal as well as present it to end users. So when they hit this URL or when they bring up their PrinterLogic client and just left click on it, it's going to bring up this portal. And based on those IP address range objects, we'll default them to the location that they're in. So they can either find the printer on the map, click install, or see it in the list down below that has some more information and just click on it, set it as a default if they want, and then install the printer. Very simple. So this has eliminated a lot of help desk tickets in my customers, just for the simple fact of people needing to install printers and them generating a help desk call. This will alleviate all that burden from your support team, and they will love this new process that your clinicians and your staff can go through. All right, so one other thing in here, or a couple of other things. We can also deploy by host name, where this is important, what I find in healthcare, in particular for kiosk devices, shared user workstations. If you have a particular naming convention for a department or a wing of a hospital, you can use different wildcards in here. So say this is going to be our East Wing, and it's going to start, each machine name is going to start with these 4 characters. I can put an asterisk in here that'll be a catch-all or wildcard for everything. So the nice part about that is if you're deploying new devices into the field, new Windows devices getting imaged and sent out into the field. You don't have to go and create GPOs and scripts or manually install printers. Just by virtue of that rule being in the deployment rule list, they will automatically get the printers that they need based on that host name and based on the naming convention you have as a standard. So very simple to operate for those types of use cases. On the Chrome OS side, if you're dipping your toe in the water with that, and I have a few customers, actually I have one large customer that made a full transition from Windows to Chrome OS and is using PrinterLogic for both environments as they continue to make that transition. It's the same end user experience as I mentioned before, same printer deployment policies that we set up here, just a little bit different in how we identify them. So Chrome uses, or Google uses, two different methods. You can either use a serial number or an asset ID, which is akin to a host name in the Chrome OS world. So again, all from the same console, you're managing the same printers, push them to different operating systems based on all of these different criteria. And then advanced groups, you can create rules tied together with AND operators. So if I wanted to say, I want a user to be part of this computer group or part of this user group, excuse me, and be in this IP address range before I deploy this printer, you can create those advanced groups and then apply them as well. From a simplification perspective, I mentioned before that we can also administer or manage output jobs from Cerner, from Epic, from other EMR providers. So jumping back into here, let me talk through that a little bit and how that would work. So the idea behind this and why we've created this, we have a number of healthcare customers that I mentioned before, they're running two different stacks. So you're managing, if you have one printer, you're managing that printer two different ways. One is to present it to Epic, one is to present it to all of your end user clients. What we've done is built on the Epic side an Epic connector that leverages an output management API so that we can receive print jobs direct from the Epic backend, whether it's installed in your data center or Epic is provided as a hosted service to you. Independent of that, we'll receive the print job from Epic into this connector and then be able to apply services to it. So we can do things like secure release printing, which we'll get into in a few minutes here. We can do services like off-network printing, which allows you to send print jobs from one network to another, where there's no layer 3 adjacency or VPN in between them. So traverses a firewall, traverses a network boundary. We provide a secure mechanism to traverse that network boundary without having to open up VPNs or anything like that. But the idea here is in our system, you're managing the queue once, and you're now presenting it to Epic, and you're presenting it to all of your end user clients. So from a cost savings perspective, if you're managing a different output solution, like an LRS, like a Kofax, an OM+, we can absorb that functionality inside of PrinterLogic and have just one single solution to operate all the print queues and one single solution from an operating budget point of view. This also eliminates particularly around Epic, all of the Microsoft print server infrastructure that you need supporting Epic. So if you have a number of EPS that are spun up supporting Epic, we can eliminate those print queues need to be installed on those Windows print servers, and we'll just hook directly into the print service to receive that print job and then be able to distribute that via direct IP on your local network. And inside of the console where we configure that, we have machines called service clients in here. Service clients is basically a PrinterLogic client installed on a dedicated VM running a Windows Server 2019 or later, and is provisioned to do dedicated functions. So you can see there's a whole bunch of things across the top that it can do. In this sense, we would set it up for the output management service. And this is where we can create high availability and having multiple service clients that have a shared storage. So when we receive the print job from Epic in this sense, we'll dump that into some type of shared storage or AWS S3 bucket so that any of these service clients can receive that job and process it. And when we connect into Epic, there's some ports that need to be opened up. There's some certificate information that needs to be validated and exchanged and configured in here. and some user information inside of the Epic environment for us to transmit status back of the print job. So print job was printed, it was received, all that kind of stuff uses a credentialed Epic user service account user to be able to send that information back. So once you configure this, we configure this service, and then all of the printers are then enabled for that service. So we can print to these same printers via the Epic Output Management Connector, or we can print to them via direct IP on the end user side. It's a similar setup for the Cerner environment. And just going back in here quick, just with one slight modification. So with Cerner, we don't have a direct integration into Cerner. What we use is a generic LPD service to receive print jobs from LPR queues that are set up inside of the Cerner environment. So most of my customers that are running Cerner, it's typically in a hosted environment. Cerner is hosting the print server, the print queue, and potentially the output management service as well. I have one customer right now that is a Cerner customer. They have LRS, and Cerner is managing that for them. We are working with them to transition off of LRS, keep the Cerner hosted service, but leverage this LPD service to send the send the Cerner backend print jobs into our system so that we can enable pull printing authentication using badge credentials or using a mobile release app, which I'll show you in a few minutes here, to provide that as an added service of something they weren't gaining at this point. So same type of functionality, just we receive the print job in a different way. I'm using this LPD service to get that. Just to reiterate here, I know I said this a couple of times already, but in terms of integrating with solutions, the goal with PrinterLogic is to make this your standard. As you grow organically, as new use cases arise, as you acquire new properties, that you're going to have different types of end user devices, different types of operating systems, different types of printers that need to be supported. Our goal is for you to use this as a standard that's going to expand to be flexible over time. And we're going to continually build out these partnerships. And this is not an all-inclusive list of everyone we partner with, just some of the major players that are pertinent in the healthcare environment. So we talked about the EMR side. We talked a little bit about the virtual side, so Citrix, VMware, traditional RDS services, or Azure virtual desktop environments. We play very well in either redirected or session-based printing environments and can satisfy all those different use cases, all the different operating systems that are out there, major operating systems that are out there, and continuing to evolve those as new use cases come up and what we see with our customers. On the IDP side, already talked through this a bit, but just to expand upon that, anything that's really SAML 2.0 based, we can support in there, both from a roles-based access control perspective. So how you get into our admin console, we can hook that into a SAML 2.0 provider so that you can do roles-based access. And we can also identify users or devices based on the SAML 2.0 logins as well. And then from a web browser perspective, this is needed for that self-service portal that I showed you. There's a plugin that's needed to enable that functionality to talk to our PrinterLogic client. And we support all the major browsers that are out there with Edge, Chrome OS, Safari, and Firefox. And then on the print manufacturer side, again, this is not an all-inclusive list, but we can support anything that's out there, inclusive of label printers, thermal printers, anything that has a driver that we can work with in our system and test and validate it. We can support that printer in our environment. So very easy to, again, create a standard and evolve that standard over time, either through organic growth or growth over time through acquisition. All right, let's talk a little bit about security at this point. So I mentioned that's one of the biggest things, obviously, in evaluating any solution inside of healthcare, making sure that it's appropriately going to handle any PHI that is going to be made available to the system, and it's not going to induce any HIPAA compliancy issues or anything like that. So you can rest assured that we are HIPAA compliant and we have the certifications to prove it. We have our ISO 27001 cert and just got our SOC 2 Type 2 report for our SaaS environment. In addition to those things, the biggest takeaway from a security perspective is we're keeping print jobs local, like I mentioned in the opening. No print job data is leaving your network. Everything is kept inside of your firewall. And because of that, and because of the fact that we're not sending it to a print server, it is less susceptible to breach and is more protected just inherently of the architecture that we're providing. In addition to that, we do have some other functionality that aligns with where cybersecurity teams are going in this idea of zero trust or minimal trust type of environments. And if you're not familiar with what that is, zero trust is basically a construct that's saying, I don't want any devices to talk to any other devices. I want to control all of that, not through opening up ports and protocols and firewall rules, but I need almost like an intermediary to do that and establish trust through secure sockets that are stood up and torn down automatically. So we have entered into that space with a type of functionality we refer to as off-network printing. And what that looks like from an architectural perspective, what that looks like from an architectural perspective, I mentioned before, off-network printing is anytime you want to print something from one network to another, and you don't have, and it's crossing a network boundary, and you don't have a layer 3 adjacency or VPN. So think of, I've had customers where their Epic environment is shared by affiliate clinics and affiliate hospitals, and they need to print from the backend Epic application to that affiliate location. And right now they manage VPNs or deploy hardware out at the remote site to be able to open up that communication. Through use of off-network printing, we can eliminate the need for that VPN or that hardware device creating that connection and use this off-network printing service. So what basically happens here is there's an external gateway that's either hosted in our cloud service or can be customer hosted. And when a user prints or when Epic is going to send that backend print job, it's going to hit that external gateway. And then there's going to be an internal routing service that sits on the remote side of the network. That internal routing service communicates outbound to that external gateway to understand if there's any print jobs destined to it. If there are, it opens up a secure socket to receive that print job in a TLS encrypted channel, and then send that print job from the internal routing service on the local network to the target printer. So we establish security all the way around, but there's no need for building complicated VPNs or deploying hardware at remote locations to facilitate the secure transmission of that. And that can be applicable to client-side printing or the back-end clinical printing coming from your EMR systems. One second. All right. So one other thing I want to touch on, then we'll jump back into the demo. This goes kind of hand in hand with security, because security kind of enables this cost containment mechanism. And what we're trying to do here, I have a number of customers that say, we have no visibility into how much we're printing. We don't have a good handle on that. Maybe we have that, from our MPS provider that's managing a portion of our fleet, but it's not the entirety of what everyone's printing, what printing is truly costing the business, and are there ways that we can eliminate costs from the equation? So in order to address that, what we do is a couple of different things. So first off, we give detailed reporting on everything that is printed inside the system, and I'll show you that in a second. So it's every single print job that's sent. We're gleaning the user information, the printer that it was printed to, the document title if you want to capture that, or we can hide that for HIPAA compliancy purposes. How many pages was it? Was it black and white? Was it color? We have all this detailed data about the print job that now we can provide you in a dashboard for reporting purposes. And you can look at that data in different ways and see, per location, how many prints are coming in that particular location, per printer, how many prints are destined to that printer over the last 6 months. And maybe you're trying to isolate which printers haven't been printed to in a given time period. And now you can shed those leases and actually consolidate your entire fleet, saving costs. There's a number of different ways to use that information to understand how much printing is costing your environment, or how much printing is costed in your environment, and then figuring out different ways to reduce that through some of the different mechanisms that we'll talk about now. One of those things is pull printing or secure release printing. And I've mentioned this a couple of different times, but once we have the foundational system set up in our environment with this centrally managed direct IP printing, now we can also layer additional security on top of it. So your traditional badge release, pin release at the printer, or we have some other mechanisms to do that. So in order for this to work, we have to have some type of identity source to identify the user. So this is where those SAML 2.0 cloud services come into play, where we can hook into those environments in a secure fashion, cloud to cloud communication, and identify and authenticate users against those systems. For the printing perspective, everything is going to happen the same way. The only thing that's going to change is where we install the PrinterLogic client. Instead of that job getting automatically released to the printer, we're going to hold it at the PrinterLogic client at the end user machine until that user or that clinician goes and identifies themselves at the printer through one of these different mechanisms and then releases that job. So one of the things that we find is, and this is different depending on which particular customer I'm talking to, but anywhere from 5 to 20% of print jobs in an environment never get picked up and just sit there on a paper tray. So that does two things. A, that creates waste because typically you're paying for each print on a per click basis, or you're just paying for the consumables to enable that print job. So if somebody is printing and not picking it up, that's money that is actually wasted. Secondly, from a security perspective, if there's PHI confidential information on that print job and someone else picks it up that shouldn't be seeing that, that's a potential breach for patient information or HIPAA violation and could be costly to your organization overall. So what we're trying to do here is eliminate both of those things from happening. We want to control the cost by making sure that if someone's printing something, they're actually picking it up. And if they're not, it just gets purged from the system and you're not incurring that cost. And then secondly, if someone is printing something, we want to make sure that person who printed it is the one picking it up so that we kind of have that chain of custody for the confidential and PHI information. So how this would look from the end user side of things, if we're doing the traditional badge release or pin release, what we do is push a control panel application to the printer, and then the end user would interact with it in this manner. So they would be presented with this screen. They would swipe their badge, for instance, select the PrinterLogic app. I'm going to click my print jobs because now I know who this user is via their badge credential. And now I'm going to release them to the printer. Simple, easy to use. Again, trying to save money by the instantiation of this technology and reducing our overall print volume by that 5 to 20% and reducing those per click charges and enhancing the security of PHI by doing this. The other thing that we've done, this has kind of been the traditional way for release is interaction at the printer. This does require additional hardware. So if you don't have badge readers, you need to get badge readers. Those can be 100, 200 a pop. If you have a couple hundred or a couple thousand printers, that starts to add up into a cost. We're also talking about pushing software to printers. So now we get into compatibility issues. How old is the printer? What firmware is it running? Is this application going to be compatible with every printer I have in the fleet? The answer is probably not ubiquitously, and there might be some upgrades and different things that need to happen to make this work. So to get around all of that complexity and potential costs that you would incur, what we've done is introduced a mobile app release via QR code mechanism. So how this works, each user would download a mobile app, or you would push it from your MDM provider and pre-configure this URL in here. So this will work on iOS, this will work on Android. The end user would then have to log in for the first time. So this is where that integration with the SAML 2.0 providers comes into play. So Okta, Azure AD, Google, they'll input their information in here and then sign in. Once they're in the app, then they would click on this little orange button down on the right. That's going to open up the camera inside of the app. They would scan the QR code that you've now affixed to the printer, and this QR code is generated from our console. And then they would see the same thing that they would have seen on the control panel of the printer, just now it's in the mobile app. So same thing, they would select their jobs for release because now we know who the user is and the printer they want to print to. They select them for release and then they click the orange button again to release it. Now the jobs are released from the end user machine to the printer. So this mobile app is just a release mechanism. The job itself is still held on the device or the operating system that was the original sender of that job. It's not sent to the mobile device. I've been asked that question before, and I want to make sure that that's perfectly clear. This is just operating as the release mechanism that basically replaces the badge credential for doing that. On the configuration side, how we set all that up is on each print queue. So, well, a couple of different things. So one, we're going to come back to the service client construct. I mentioned it does a whole bunch of different things. One of the things it does is facilitate this functionality when we're doing the control panel application. So if we want to go that route, we enable this printer app service. This allows us to push the control panel application to different printers via this printer app service. So this will run locally on your network as well. On the print object side, we would go into the printing tab here and then enable these printers either for secure release or pull printing. The distinction between these two is secure release. The way we define it is, you as an end user are printing to a specific printer and want to secure that job. That is termed secure release. So we would turn that on, and then we have options here where we can say, don't secure the job, yes, always secure the job, or yes, and prompt the user. The prompt the user will actually give the user a dialog prompt where they can say, hold the job or release it. So it gives them the option as to whether or not they want to add that layer of security. Always will bypass that prompt and just secure the job always. Pull printing, by comparison, is not printing to a specific printer, but printing to a virtual queue and then releasing that job to any printer of your choice. So pulling that job down to any printer of your choice. So to enable that, what we would have to do is create a virtual queue. So this virtual queue will have the same thing. We'll define its name, location, comments. It won't have an IP or host name associated with it, but it will have a driver associated with it to control those print jobs for release. So as an end user, instead of going file print and picking Black Pearl, I'm going to pick test virtual queue, and then I will pull my job down to this printer because I've enabled this printer for pull printing. So different ways to accomplish the same thing. Depending upon the use case, you'll use one or the other or both, but both are available. Last thing here that I want to talk through with regards to reporting, I already touched on this previously when we were going through some of the slides, but this is what the reporting views look like. And as I mentioned before, every time there's a print job in the system, we're going to capture that information in here. So we'll timestamp it, username, computer name information, document title. You can also hide that, as I mentioned before. And then how many pages was it, black and white color. And we can even assign costing information to it via templates that we would apply to each printer. So this gives you an aggregate record of every single print job that is facilitated on your network via PrinterLogic, and also anything that is printed via USB. So because our PrinterLogic client runs as a system service and we have access to the local print spooler, we're able to see USB print jobs. We don't manage USB printers. We don't affect USB printing at all. We're just able to see that someone is printing to a USB printer. So if you're looking to eradicate those from your environment, you have a bunch that have been they've grown just based on necessity. People wanted them directly in their office, but now you can provide secure release mechanisms at a higher capacity, lower cost printer. You can use this reporting as a method to be able to go and find those USB printers and who is still using them and remove them from the environment if you want to. The other thing you could do here is, this is just looking at the raw records. I can also look at these reports in different ways. So I can look at user reports and look for a specific username over time and how much they have printed and get information that way. I can look at printer reports and isolate either a single printer or just run the entire report in here and see over this time period that I've stipulated how many prints have been run through the system. This is incredibly useful, as I mentioned before, in trying to figure out which printers are necessary and which printers aren't utilized in the environment anymore. And I also mentioned that customers have a hard time traditionally understanding how printing is being operated in their environment and what the total cost is and which printers are truly a necessity and which they can shed. Printers are sometimes like firewall rules in that effect. Nobody wants to remove one because they fear it might disrupt someone's use cases or workflow, or start generating more help desk tickets, whatever the case may be. This will give you empirical evidence and empirical data to say this printer here that one of your users has been demanding that be kept in place has never been printed to in the last 6 months. So you can use that data to say, we don't need this printer anymore. We don't need to pay support on it. We don't need to pay the lease costs on it and all the other charges that come with it. We can look to now consolidate our fleet and manage a more efficient and streamlined print fleet in the environment. Last one that's popular in here is by folder. So typically where this comes into play is looking at all the different print jobs that come out of each location. So if you break this down and organize everything by location, you're trying to do bill back, charge back type of scenarios, you can isolate how many print jobs are coming from each printer in the location and each location aggregate so that you can associate cost to that. So a bunch of powerful information that could be gleaned from here. All right, so I know we're running short of time and we showed you a lot throughout this discussion. It's amazing how quickly an hour flies by. The last thing I'll leave you with here is, what are the next steps? So if you like what you heard and are interested to figure out how this would fit in your environment, how it would fit your specific use cases, the next step would be setting up a direct meeting with us and with Marco to talk through that and work through. We'll understand your environment, understand your requirements, and do a more in-depth tailored demo specific for what your needs are. From there, assuming this meets the need and you have kind of this project queued up in your project plan for the given fiscal year, the next thing is to do a technical validation through a POC. So we give you full access to the system for 30 days to put it through its paces. We help you identify all the use cases that we want to test. We make sure that we're tracking towards those use cases. And Aaron and myself and our engineers will support you every step of the way in making sure that you are getting what you need from the product and technically validating it against your requirements for the project that you have ahead of you. And then in parallel to that, it's working with you to create the business case for justification. I mentioned before that budgets are tight inside of healthcare, margins are thin, and everyone's looking for different ways to save costs. So I've had a lot of conversations where people need budget neutral proposals to be able to get projects through. So I'm spending as much as I'm going to be saving through the instantiation of this technology. Depending upon how projects are looked at inside of your environment and how they're justified, we can help you to work through that and create the justification that is going to work for your directors, VPs, and executives to greenlight this particular project. So we can help you to craft that, create some content too that you can use to articulate up the chain the value that you will gain from the functionality, the value that provides your clinicians through instantiation of the functionality, and the savings that will be generated, or the return on investment that will be gleaned through the use of the functionality. So again, thank you for your time and attention here. And I guess at this point, we'll open it up and see if there's any questions in the Q&A, or we can start to address some questions live here.
No questions in the Q&A, Matt. I do want to say, if anyone does have any questions, comments, please let us know. I'm happy to hear from you. If not, I prefer to keep those more of a one-on-one. We will be doing a follow-up with everyone who attended to see if we can find a time that works for you to dig more into your specific environment. So again, any questions from the group at all? If not, we'll let you have 4 minutes back to your day, because I know you're all busy IT professionals. But like I said, look forward to an email from Marco and just following up with each of you, see if we can spend some time one-on-one with your environment and your specific needs to see if PrinterLogic will be a fit for you.